Welcome to the Unlocked Podcast. It's episode 1. We're excited to share some things with you today. One, we're going to be talking about KPIs, key performance indicators, the magical metrics that tell you if your business is booming or busting. We're going to be breaking that down today. Essential numbers for every locksmith and security business that they need to track, plus how the numbers will help you improve your operation, boost your profits, and dominate your competition. Welcome to the Unlocked Podcast. My name is Chad Lingafeld.
I'm Tony Hokinson.
Hey guys, I'm Lars Johnson. That was good. That sounded good, boys. Episode 1, that was pretty good. We are talking about KPIs, and which are very important here in the doorknob industry, which is what we are doing. We talk about, well, you guys talk about a lot of stuff, and then I talk about a few things that actually work. The main one I am looking at on a daily is drive time. I use a fancy word and say it's our industry's dichotomous. We're only doing two things, rather looking through a windshield driving somewhere, or we are turning a wrench.
Yep.
One of those things we get paid for. So rather than worrying about a bunch of details and where we're going, what we're doing, there's a whole bunch of different metrics we look at. Daily service calls is something, but what I really focus on is if we spend less time driving, we spend more time working. That's plain and simple like that. So my goal is minimizing the amount of drive time between each call or each dispatch, because if we're not doing that, we're in the field working.
So you're tracking the time, but the downtime effectively,
More or less, yeah.
or tracking the drive time between jobs.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. We're going from A to B. The closer we can group jobs, and we changed the way we schedule and book service requests. Rather than saying, hey, Chad, when do you want me to come and bail you out of a jam?
Mm-hmm.
As usual. What we now do is we look and see where you are and say, hey, Chad, how about Wednesday afternoon? Does that work for you? Because I already got a guy in that area.
Sure.
So what that's done is that's reduced dramatically our amount of time spent driving vis-a-vis, which means now we're spending more time in the field actually billing hours.
So the lag measure there is number of hours driven, so you can monitor that from week to week. The less hours that you drive, the more hours that you have to work.
Exactly.
What did you see as far as a change when you started monitoring that?
Bringing awareness to the people that are actually doing it. It's amazing. You tell somebody that you're keeping score, and then you tell them what score you're keeping, they pay attention to it. So we were averaging about 18 or 19 minutes per call. So you think of that, you're doing, let's just run through some simple math here, but you got, let's say 20 minutes, because that's an easy number for you, Tony. 20 minutes of call, you're doing 5 calls a day. So you're spending 100 minutes driving. Right now, you got probably 15 technicians at 100 minutes of driving. 15 times 100, I think that's about 1,500. You can figure out how many hours that is. So not only are you spending that time and paying people to drive around for, what is that, 6 hours?
Mm-hmm.
You are now also the opportunity cost. You're not billing anything. So once we started paying attention to this was between 17 and 20 minutes, I think is where we started. We're now down to about 15 minutes. I know when we were actively pushing this, we got down to 12 or 13 minutes. For a company my size, an extra 1 minute of drive time works out to be like $120,000 a year of
hard to sell a door closer when you're driving around the city.
It is. It's hard to do work when you're driving, sitting in traffic.
I like that measurement. We've kind of tracked on the response time, just the number of days out that we're booking, number of site visits per day, those types of things. But I like the measurement of drive time because it really does. It is a really interesting indicator of how much of that daily capacity. Because I think one of the other major components of all this is how much is the potential work that you can get done in a given day. And as you said so eloquently, you're either turning screws or you're sitting behind the windshield.
Turning wrenches.
Right.
Yeah.
We turn. Anyways, at the end of the day, right, if you can minimize the windshield time, it increases your capacity to turn wrenches.
Right. Last thing I'd add is where this actually came from, and where this, what prompted me to start looking at this was in an exit interview. One of my guys said, I'm a part-time locksmith and I'm a full-time driver.
Ooh, wow.
So I looked at that, and he's spending 3.5, 4 hours a day driving around in traffic.
So how much money did that exit interview save you?
Yeah, it was a good one. Ironically, the guy's he's come back,
Yeah.
but he was the one that I was like, oh man, can you imagine sitting in rush hour traffic for 4 hours a day?
Yeah.
You just start punching people.
Just out of curiosity, I know a lot of people listening might be wondering, how do you track something like that? What are you doing to track drive time?
That's fair. First of all, I'm not sure anyone's listening, but I would say, if there is, so what we look at is GPS reports. So you
Okay.
probably will have something in your GPS that says when the van turns on, the van turns off, so you can monitor that. If I'm going to reference ESC, which is pretty common in our industry. They mark traveling time when they're moving between jobs.
Okay.
The main thing is if you can automate it with your GPS, it's really it's between stops, right? And I know Chad's done that a few times. Whether it worked overly well or not, I'm not too sure. But yeah, the main thing on that is try something.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. Anything is better than nothing.
Well, every GPS software is going to at least tell you drive time. Now, you can regulate that. That's going to be based off of where they're starting their day, all these different factors, but you can at least track drive time, and then you would be able to cumulatively report that back week over week. Did we have 1,000 hours of drive time? Did we have 500 hours of drive time? And that would be a big impact.
Yeah, when it comes to response time, we track similar to you, Chad, how quickly we're getting out and servicing the customer. So we look at from ticket entry until first time on site. What is that time frame? Helps us with two things. One, try to make sure that we're getting to customers as quickly as possible, but also, like you said, it's a good indicator of backlog. If that number starts getting up to 3, 4, 5 days, it's like, ooh, yep, we're definitely a little busy. So definitely something good to keep an eye on.
Tony, do you guys complete jobs? Because that's what you're supposed to talk about next. Job completion rate.
Yes. Job completion rate. I thought I was supposed to talk about response time.
Oh, I don't know.
Let's move to number 2. I
Job
think
completion rate. So that is one of the biggest KPIs that we look at on a consistent basis. We have always had issues with we complete jobs, but we tend to like to take some time before we bill for them. So guys will go out, turn wrenches, fix the door. Got to make sure that we finish our paperwork, as everyone still calls it, even though it's not on paper. We use a system. But making sure that everything is closed out in that ticket, making sure that it's ready for invoice. And then, so we actually got down to the point where we were tracking from work order completion to work order closeout, job completion to work order closeout, and then work order closeout to work order being invoiced. At one point when we were tracking it, I think it was up to like 7 or 8 days. And then starting to track it, we actually got it down to being pretty quick. And it's still something today.
And he froze again.
He was just saying that they've moved from paperwork to electronic. But I think the key there is that he has to have internet in Minnesota, which I'm not sure they do.
Are you dialed up? AOL? Hey, Tony, did you get on AOL?
I should make sure I'm not like hotspotting here. Can you hear me now?
We can now, yes.
Okay. So,
they also track internet speed in Minnesota as part of their business too.
Yeah, we should. Job completion rate. Yes. So we've always had issues with job completion rate. A lot of times people go out there, they fix the door, but making sure that everything is done on the ticket's closed out and then invoiced is very important. And we realized that that's a big area that we had delays in. So we started tracking that a few years ago. Two things we track on that is a leading measure and B, a lag measure. From a leading standpoint, we look at how many open work orders people have. So how many tickets have you been on site for that you haven't closed out? Making sure that number stays down. And then B, once a ticket is closed out, more of a lag measure, how long did it take to go from job on site to work order invoiced? So looking at that is by monitoring that, it definitely helped us decrease the amount of time it takes to do those things. And it's still something we track very closely today. Every tech knows how many tickets they have in their reschedule queue and making sure to keep that low. And if they're not staying low, figuring out what, is it a training issue? Is it a prioritization issue? But keeping track of those measurements has really helped decrease the job completion time.
What's your actual target here? Like what's an acceptable amount of jobs that are, put to the side or on pause jobs?
So we look for, once you've been on site, we want you to complete it within a day. Ideally on site, get it done right there. But if nothing else, if you have a lot of calls to get to, at least get it done first thing next morning. And then we're looking to have it invoiced within a day from that. So overall, 2 days from work completion to invoice sent is our target.
Yeah. Why do you think that's important? Why do you pay attention to that?
I mean, from a just a accounting and cash flow standpoint, the faster we get the
Yeah.
invoice out to the customer. Also, one of the things that I think about is ultimately we're in the customer service business. So
Mm-hmm.
the quicker our response time is on everything, the better perception we give to our
Yep.
customers. So we may get out and fix your door quickly, but if all of a sudden you get an invoice 15 days late, the customers
Yeah.
forgot what happened. They're more likely to have
Yeah.
questions about it, and it just doesn't show accountability from a business standpoint. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Chad, I see you got your crayons out and you're doodling over there. What's going on?
Well, I was drawing a self portrait of you, but what I just charted out here was kind of a timeline because there's a lot of different points that we're tracking, and some of them are very specific. We're trying to stay under a certain time frame, and some of them are we can't control because we're waiting on parts from a supplier or whatever. So we're tracking from a completion rate standpoint, creating a site visit to the start of a site visit, and we want that to be under 3 days, less than 3 days, right? Most of the time we're less than 48 hours, but sometimes in a busy season you can get up there. From the start of the job to waiting, meaning that we have to order additional parts or whatever,
Mhm.
is a variable that we a lot of times can't control. But within that, kind of there's a subset of how long is a parts request waiting in our
mhm,
system, and
Mhm.
then kind of going from there. From waiting to parts arrived, we track that as well. So
Mhm.
starting of the job, waiting, parts arrived. And then once we get into that, then we can control some of the timeline. So parts arrived to 100% completed of
Mhm.
installation. We want that to be under 21 days for most projects. So
Mhm.
that's a big window if it's a service related job. So something that is more responsive, that's obviously
Yeah.
going to be shrunk down. If it's a larger project, it may increase. 100% to invoiced. So that means 100% of the tasks are done. Everything is completed on the job. It gets to the invoice. That's under 24 hours. We're tracking that. And
Mhm.
then from invoiced to money in the bank,
Mhm.
under
hmm,
27 days. So
Mhm.
there's several different elements across that because that's all part of the completion process, and we track each element of it.
Yeah, it's that's an in-depth walk through how you do that. I mean, just those 15 things you're looking at. Um, but I remember we were talking about a lot of this stuff during the COVID era, when we really didn't have a whole bunch else to do, but we spent a lot of time chatting and trying to figure out how to conserve cash flow, right? Um, and that was a main thing. We noticed, work in progress, something you can monitor usually pretty easy. We worked out things with our suppliers that, we order stuff, but we don't actually pick it up
mhm,
until we need it the day before, right? Because a lot of times you'll have 50 parts on a job, 37 of them will show up, and then the time starts to pay for those, and you're waiting for the other ones. So, it's just been I'm going to use the word intentional here, just an intentional practice to try and keep the parts with the wholesaler or the manufacturer until we need them, because that tightens that timeline and I guess impacts cash flow. That's the main goal here.
Perfect. Next one is customer satisfaction score. That's something we've been trying to figure out how to measure that for quite some time. And we recently, within the last 12 months, shifted over to aligning more with the net promoter score
Mhm.
calculation. And there is a whole, I mean, it's a bunch of free information on the internet if you haven't used it, but we started years ago just asking the simple question at the end of the conclusion of every job. An automatic email goes out to a customer and says, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us to a team member or a family member, right? And then we were getting that information back, and we for the longest time were just measuring the average score on a scale of 0 to 10.
Mhm.
What we found of that was it was ineffective in the long run because low scores didn't matter as much.
Mhm.
So then we shifted that same using that same question, those same calculations over to the net promoter score calculation, where it ranges from a 7 through 10 gives you a certain score,
Mhm.
5 and 6 give you a certain score, 1 through 4 or 0 through 4 gives you a certain score or a deduction of score.
Mhm.
And then we track that and we report on that every month to our team. We want to stay above an 80% or an 80 net promoter score, and we've been averaging in that high 80 range for the last well, we track it by quarter, so for the first 3 quarters of this year.
Mhm.
And it is helping us understand really where we need to serve our customers better or the areas that we're winning well. And along with every single one of those, it offers the ability for a customer to give direct feedback. So if something went well or something went bad, they can give that. And then it also prompts them to give us a Google review. So it's kind of a step process. What we found with that, just to get real numbers, right? We are getting about a 10 to 15% response rate on the surveys that we send out. So if we send out 100 of those, we get 10 to 15 responses back. And then of that, we're probably at about another 10 to 20% that actually will get into a Google review status. So it's a very small segment of it, but it is asking the people and it's giving every opportunity that we can to get that response.
Yeah, I'm just a little distracted because Tony's playing with his microphone. So,
Naturally.
as of course, and I would agree, Chad. LockDoc is absolutely my favorite Charlotte-based locksmith and security company in the southeast of America. So, that's pretty big.
It's really
pretty
going
high
on
praise.
a limb there.
Yeah, it's pretty
Surprised you
high
make
praise.
such an outlandish statement.
I've never say anything outlandish. Tone, what are you guys doing for customer satisfaction, Tone?
We actually don't do a very good job on measuring customer satisfaction.
Okay. You guys just hug each other in
I
Minnesota.
hope we do a good job of keeping them satisfied. We have been starting to track positive reviews. So basically, it's tracking the number of Google reviews we get or the number of compliments we get. We've worked on building into our system just a way to track the number of compliments, basically. We've had some recent talks about doing Net Promoter Score, and I think that's something we're going to be looking to implement. So that was very helpful to hear. But unfortunately, we don't have a good way to track how happy they are beyond sales increasing. So.
Well, the one thing is Minnesotans don't really say bad things about each other. So,
boy.
Although, like, recommending somebody to somebody is a proactive thing that a lot of Minnesotans also don't like to do. We're just very nice on the street, but we don't like to invite you over to our house or do anything proactive.
There's a saying about that, nice in the street.
Yeah,
I don't remember what that is, but I might mention, we're big on Google reviews. We've talked about this. Our company specifically is a lot more service oriented than either of yours. So, the number of tickets we're doing, a lot of referral business. I think a lot of people find us online, and we have good reviews, and we have a few thousand 5-star reviews, and our guys are actively trying to bring in more. What I find interesting is how it impacts morale. Guys like, what's everyone's favorite topic in the world? Well, I can tell you, it's themselves, right? So everyone likes hearing, good things that have happened. The one thing I notice when I go through it is I'm yet to see any review saying, "Oh, that Tony, he really hung that door straight," right? That's not.
Yeah.
And it's all about the service.
Yeah, and I'm not sure Tony could hang a door straight. But my point was more so, they're all, "Oh, Tony was a great guy. Oh, he showed up on time. He got, I called them. They're here within an hour. The price was, it wasn't too much." These are the things that constantly, come up, and that what I use that for more than anything is that's what we then focus our branding and our marketing, and that's kind of try and ingrain that in our culture, because it's, the squareness of the deadbolt that you just installed really isn't all that impactful. But he showed up, his shirt was tucked in, he didn't have a chewing tobacco in his mouth. Like these are things that people appreciate.
It's interesting. I was just scrolling through X this morning, and I saw I don't know, you still call them tweets? But anyways, well, it's not Twitter anymore. So is it still a tweet?
It's an
Keep
X.
going.
Yeah,
okay.
But it was very progressive of you to identify it as X. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and there was something about how, like, all the large brands, they advertise based on the emotion they make you feel. So they talked about.
Did he just say large brands?
What?
No, well, Tony's dial-up cuts out every once in a while, so you have to guess what he's saying. But yes, his lard brands. Go ahead, Tony. You were getting somewhere. Let's go. You were on X.
Large brands. They advertise and they focus on the emotions they make you feel. Nike, Coca-Cola. They had a list of the emotions they make you feel. I think Nike's was performance or something, but it's not an emotion. So, anyways, if I could remember the tweet, it would be more impactful. But what I'm getting at here is focus on the feeling you want to provide the person, not necessarily the thing you're doing for them. Like you said,
Yeah.
it's not how straight did you hang the door. It's what did you feel? I know one thing that you focus on is the feeling of safety.
Hmm.
What
Good
was that
plug.
feeling? The feeling of convenience. I
Yeah.
thought that was kind of an
So
interesting. It kind of
yeah,
ties into what you were saying there.
to add on what you just said, Lars, because I think this is really cool. We had 22 last week, so we get a report on this every Monday morning, and on our team call that we start the week off, our customer service manager goes through this, and they give shout outs to the technicians that got that. So very valid point. Some of the stuff on here, Ben was great, very professional service. Thanks, great to work with you. Thanks, great and timely service, friendly staff, amazing job, best service. Again, to your point, none of it says the lock is an amazing lock. It's the people that you're dealing with. And so they'll go through and say, Leonard got X number of 10s on his customer feedback. And then they highlight that in all of our team meetings. So they're promoting it and then reading off the feedback, because that's really where we know if we're working and winning well with our customers or if we need to make adjustments
Yeah,
accordingly.
and that's really defining success, right? And it's important to share that with the guys so they know, the 5-star review, does that do anything for us? Well, not directly. What that does is that just made that person a fan of your business. There's lots of books that'll talk about fans,
Yeah.
net promoter score, because that's really what we're trying to do. And eventually that will impact revenue,
Sure.
which is segue.
Revenue per job. Good job. That was fantastic, Lars. Just
See,
knocked that one out of the
Well
park.
done.
see, you guys can, maybe should we just take a moment so everyone can, I assume everyone listening is applauding right now. So
No.
Yeah,
but
I
we'll
can
just,
hear it. I can hear
yeah,
it.
I'll just ad lib a little bit here while the
They're
applause
hitting
roar.
they're
Okay.
hitting the like and unlike button multiple times. That's
That's what I'm looking for. So we're talking about, another KPI that we are looking at, again, a key performance indicator. And we've mentioned the word lag measure and lead measure a few times. And I think, tell me what book that came from.
4 Disciplines of Execution is a
40X,
great,
right?
yeah, it's a great reference.
Yes, right. So, it's a bit of a baffling topic to go through, and you can get Chad.
Yeah, we can talk about it if you want.
Yeah, no, I absolutely have heard enough from you about this topic forever. However, the key performance indicator, what we're looking at, revenue per job. So what we are paying attention to, one is margin, something I learned from you guys. Revenue. I think this was Uncle Glenn again, and his reference of revenue is vain, right? And looking at margin, that's really the dollars you're bringing in per job, and keeping that number sustainable. You can pretty quickly just reverse engineer some numbers to figure out, are these jobs profitable, which then in turn makes business decisions fact based rather than subjective, which I think is probably worthwhile. So the in our industry, there's going to be kind of 3 main areas you're going to look at. There's going to be a labor component, there's going to be a hardware component, and there is going to be some kind of charge to bring your office to them. And looking at those 3 areas, it's just like any situation when you're looking at a big picture. The one I always talk about is inventory. Okay, we got $800,000 in inventory. How do we, how do you reduce that number? Well, it's just like looking at your revenue and trying to understand where your company makes money. If you have one revenue line, when I started, we honestly had one revenue line, sales. Now we've got about 40, because we are breaking it down into specific areas so it's easier to digest, and you can come up with an actual strategy. But that, is that takes a little bit of effort to figure out where we're going.
Yeah, I sat to a meeting yesterday, and it was a fractional CFO talking about, obviously, profit, right? So exactly what you were talking about. Glenn Younger had this statement that kind of he punched us all in the gut through the COVID years when we were meeting about revenue is for ego, net profit is really, I don't remember. It was a really good quote, but we screwed it all up.
It was impactful, obviously.
It was. It just really that we were all focusing on the wrong thing. And this guy was talking about the really dissecting all of your revenue in having the ability to subcategorize it by customer type and by product line or product categories, so that you have the ability to go back in and see where your profitable lines of business are. And when you just bring everything in as one big bucket, just like you were discussing, you don't get a really good picture of it. And so the more that you can dissect that thing down, bring it in and subcategorize it, the more you'll know what areas of the business you need to focus on for growth and the areas of the business that you want to really just walk away from because it is not actually making you money. It's just keeping you busy.
Yeah, what we realized is our biggest constraint is people doing the labor, right? So the thing that we look at the most is what is our revenue per build hour of labor. So we've broken it down by different categories: handicap operators, access control, commercial locksmithing, cameras, the major segments we do. And we look at what is the revenue, not per job, but per labor hour for those categories. So we can look at when we're doing proactive marketing, which ones should we be focusing on? Which types of jobs do we make most profit per hour on?
Yep.
And that's been really helpful. And it's actually surprising to see, from a project standpoint, from a service standpoint, like what are we making on our generic service versus our access control projects and so forth. So looking at it on a per hour basis has been really helpful in trying to help with our marketing. And then also when it comes to revenue per job from a marketing standpoint, it's nice to know, if I get this lead, what is my expectation of how much revenue that lead will bring me? So,
Smack the microphone, Tony. Anytime you can. Yeah.
I do appreciate how close you get that microphone right in your face, Tom.
Yeah.
Well, Chad said to, so I just,
Oh, well, if Chad said to, it must
usually
be
he has
right.
wisdom. Usually, except for when he listens to you, then he's not.
But
But
Tony,
anyway.
you actually did make a good point there, and I'd like to acknowledge that. But
very briefly,
very briefly,
glaze right over it
just before you slap the mic. But we were talking about you talked about the limiting factor as labor.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we are going to see more and more in the industry. And I've had this conversation a couple times recently, actually, that eventually all product becomes commoditized. As Alibaba, AliExpress, direct openings with other parts of the world where it's just so cheap to manufacture goods. What happens is the products that we sell just become commoditized. I mean, Amazon's already done that, right? That convenience and response time. But the one thing that isn't being commoditized, the one thing that is limiting, is exactly what you said. It's the labor. It's the hourly or the actual turning of the screws, Chad. Because generally, I'm sure, I get you both have kids, and I'm sure your kids both growing up, they want to be locksmiths, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess your kid's under a year old, but
he
soon
definitely
enough,
still wants to be a locksmith. Absolutely.
Yeah, he'll definitely want to be a locksmith or a carpenter, an electrician. But that's generally just not how the culture is right now. Right, they're wanting to be app developers and game developers and that kind of stuff, which just means there's going to be more and more demand for services, and that's going to become the limiting factor. And that's now what separates you from others. With the hardware component or the the product component just being commoditized, it's really going to be that labor component that drives the business going forward, I feel.
Employee productivity, for instance.
Absolutely, which is our next topic. Nice segue, Chad. Wow, you guys are really good at this. Anyways, employee productivity.
I mean, we have so much experience. This is episode 1, so we're just.
Well, you do. Lars and I, on the other hand, Lars is good at talking, but not
has
on
Chad
a
done
public
this
forum.
before?
Never. First time. Employee productivity.
Yes. So employee productivity is a new KPI that we've recently started tracking. We used to, and people are going to get annoyed, we keep saying lead and lag. We used to always look at how much labor are we billing, which we thought was a good measure of employee
Why would
productivity.
you think people would get aggravated about lead and lag? Those are really great terms.
They are great terms, but we're going to say them a lot. They're good terms, but hopefully it sticks.
If people know what they are. So for disciplines execution, I'll plug that again.
Right, yeah, we're not going to
read through it.
Yeah.
So I can give you a dissertation if you'd like, Tony.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Okay.
So, like Lars said, labor is our most constrained resource. So we started tracking how much labor are we billing. We set labor goals. Actually, that's been a big focus of us this year is let's set these labor goals. Well, what we realized is by the time you build labor or haven't built labor, it's too late. So we started looking at what is the lead measure. And to explain that a little bit more, lead measure is what is a predictive indicator? What is an activity-based measure that you can look at to see what will the results be later, which is a lag measure. So
what is the input?
Yes. What is the input that produces the output?
Right.
And when it comes to employee productivity, we started looking at the two things you can control to bill more labor are A, do more jobs, so number of trip charges, and B,
Mhm.
spend more time on site. Hopefully, you're
Mhm.
billing for all your time on site. If you do more of those two things,
Mhm.
that should produce more billed labor, especially on a service standpoint. So what we've started
Mhm.
tracking is we've broken those down into units. A trip charge is 1 unit, an hour of labor is another unit. We're tracking the number of units people have per day and per week, which we know that if they do more of those, if they spend more time on site and bill more trip charges, they will then have more billed labor. Which,
Units.
Mhm.
yeah, so that's been what we've been tracking for our KPI in that,
Y-
and we just started
So
a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully,
you
it works out.
so you categorize build labor, build hours as units.
We're basically combining trips plus build hours.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Nice.
what
That's
we
very cool.
yeah.
Chad, you look like you swallowed the canary there. Do you want to jump in on this?
Never. No, yeah, I think build hours. That's a understanding what it is, what it costs you to operate, and what you're actually charging your customers to do the work, and then being able to tabulate that. What is the expected outcome, the expected number of build hours in a given day that would add up to a good month, to a good week, to a good quarter. I said those backwards, and then a good year, obviously.
Mhm.
If you can figure that number out and then post it up to Tony's point, units, build hours, build labor, whatever term you want to use, but categorizing it down to an easy, digestible number that anybody can keep up with.
Mhm.
One year, and this didn't work well for us. I'll say that, but it was a strategy. Was
Write this down, Tone. This one doesn't work, but we're going to hear it.
this one doesn't work, but I think that
Got my pen ready.
there's a modification around it. But we were
Ah.
tracking the number of openings that we serviced because there was a direct correlation with the amount of labor and materials that we did per opening. And so
Mhm.
we said if we did X number of openings in a given period of time, then it would generate the outcome that we were looking for. But
Mhm.
it was an easily calculatable number. So if I'm a technician and I know that I need to work on 7 openings in a day to hit my
Mhm.
target, then that's something I can keep track of in my head.
Mhm.
There were a couple of variables that came out through that time period of that year that threw the calculation off, but it was a simple and digestible number. I think the lessons that we learned from it, we could probably fix it and try it again, but just keeping it simple, but it is a measure of productivity because I'm doing this thing on a regular basis.
Out in a conversation with a good friend, Ann. Ann Gruber runs a really good tight ship, up in America somewhere there.
Chicago.
Isn't Chicago? I thought it was Ashland. Doesn't matter. No, it's America. Same thing.
It's
So,
the name of our company is Ashland Lock and Door.
oh,
It's
is
in
it?
Chicago.
Ashland's not a
Yes.
place. Well, this is
Well, it is, but that's not why it's named after. I don't think.
It is a very confusing name. You would think that you would name the company after the city that you operate in, like Calgary or
right.
Minneapolis.
Maybe, but
So this is all quite riveting. But I think what I was getting at was, Anne pays attention virtually to every single job and looks at margin on every single job, and she can associate costs and assign cost and does some cost accounting. And like I said, Anne's a walking computer, I think, so she can do this kind of stuff. It would take a little bit of effort for a guy like you, Tone, but the main thing is she paid attention to quoted hours and then how much time we actually spent on site, and just made that into a ratio. She wants to be on site less than she's quoted. And then can correlate that and relate that directly to the different services. And that's where some of the flat rate pricing comes in. And the other one, a non-quoted jobs, is just simply looking at, if you're on site for an hour, are you billing for an hour? Or if you're on site for 45 minutes, are you billing for 45 minutes? Right? Lots of the time, I was here for only 52 minutes, so I'll bill for 45. And that's a natural thing for just people in general, because they want to do right by others, and don't want to charge them, and that's completely fine. But what we noticed was, we did that every single call, and it's 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, times 6 calls, times 25 technicians, and now all of a sudden we're looking at, hey, that's probably 4 or 5 new vans a year. So these numbers really add up. And it was just after the conversation with Anne, she was like, oh yeah, she knows the profitability of every single job. And if the job isn't going to meet the profitability measure for her, it's just, that's not for us. So, the other thing I was going to pivot to, because we've been talking about hourly, and I mean, you don't have to be a mathematician to figure out that if you bill by the hour, the better you are at your job, the faster you are, the less you actually bill, right? So
Right.
you're probably your highest paid technicians, your highest paid people in the field are the ones that are fastest and get the most work done. So you're paying them more and you're billing less, which of course is well, that's not a good strategy for business, right? So
Right.
it was a conversation I think I've had with Chad, and I wasn't really listening to him, but what I took from it was, there are some flat rate items. Our industry, the most obvious is rekeys. We're all traditional locksmith companies and do rekeys. Sometimes they're going to take 10 minutes, sometimes they're going to take half an hour. But on average, we know how long that's going to be, and we just set a flat rate. So we have, I don't even know the amount, but I'll say $30. Okay, it's $30 per lock. Some of those we're going to win because it's going to take 2 minutes. Some of those we're going to lose, but on average, it's going to be consistent. And what it does is it makes the faster, more skilled, higher paid people, it aligns their performance more with the revenue that they're producing. So we talk about build hours a lot, but I think if our industry could figure out a better way to do flat rate pricing, it would be a huge impact to the bottom line, as well as just
Yeah, I mean, I think
bottom
that's
line. I
the
think, yeah.
only way the auto industry really does things, right? Is like, fixing an ignition is this, fixing a carburetor is this. I don't,
Yeah.
but
And that's there's a microphone again, Tony. But and that's what we've done. We've moved away from the service call and labor. It's traditional in our industry,
right,
and we just have a flat rate for a diagnostic because we don't know
right,
what's going on. It's just like the
yep,
automotive industry. They're going to plug some machine into the car and tell you what's wrong with it. It's $150 for that minimum, right? And that's the direction we went. So
I'm not
okay,
sure if they'll edit out the microphone spring popping or if they'll just leave it in. But either way, it's Tony is just slapping his microphone
it,
randomly throughout
it
this
it
conversation.
really adds to the topic.
it's our timer.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So
yeah,
we're moving on to
Ding.
inventory turnover.
Yeah.
yes,
Inventory turnover is something we're challenged with for years, and I would say, in a small business aspect, it is the most costly thing to work on, right, or to ignore. That's actually inventory is the most costly thing to ignore, but it is the most time sucked to improve. And we found that we had way too much inventory because we weren't managing the turns correctly. We didn't quite really understand what we needed to have on the shelf. And the conversations that I've had with locksmiths all across the country have been really around, well, we have to have all this inventory because we always have to be prepared at a moment's notice to solve a customer's problem. And if we can't get it, then we're going to miss out on an opportunity to solve a customer's problem. Where there's some validity to that, the strategy around how you get there is really important and can be a major profit center for you or a major cost center for you as an organization. So I'll give you just a short summary as to where we are now and probably not bore you with all of the details that it took us to get there. But our team, through lots of conversations with other people, including some wholesale distribution and some other people in the industry that do inventory really well, found instead of focusing on the massive picture or the massive operation around inventory and the incredible complexity of it, they really shrunk it down into classifying inventory into that kind of class A, class B, class C, the high turn stuff, the stuff that you need to have all the time, the stuff that you somewhat need regularly, and then the stuff that you don't need on standby at all. And we classified it in our organization as the hot 36. So the class A stuff is the top 36 SKUs or line items that we need to have on the ready. And they were able to go in and navigate that. I think it's expanded a little bit above 36, but that was really what the starting point was. There's a whole inside joke around it that I won't bore you with, but they measure that on a weekly basis. Do we have those items in stock? And then they also measure the turns on it. How frequently are we turning those items? And then if it doesn't turn frequently enough, then it gets reduced down to the B stock. And then eventually we reduce the minimum to 0 so that we can get it out, or the max to 0 so we can get it out. And it has helped us maintain a more manageable amount of inventory on standby because we found that we had an incredible investment at a point over $750,000 of inventory sitting on the shelf. And we weren't turning that on a regular, consistent basis. And we found that a majority of the stuff we could get by sourcing it from a wholesaler where we could get it in 2 to 3 days. It wasn't as time consuming to retain, but we were sitting it on the shelf for 6 to 9 months before we sold it. So we were holding inventory, cash was tied up, and the amount of space in our warehouse that was required to hold all that was incredible. So that was costly as well.
Mhm.
So as we methodically got through that over a period of about 3 years, and we were able to reduce that, now we have a better control of it. But the big factors are measuring the amount of time that it takes you to replenish the inventory if you need to do that. And then 2, the amount of dollars that you have tied up in that particular product if it is sitting there unsold for an X amount of time.
What is your target for inventory turns?
That's a great question. I would have to ask Sam. I have
Mm.
no clue what it is.
How does one go about calculating that if they're interested in doing it?
It's another great question. I would need to ask Sam. So
I would Google it, Chad. It's reasonably straightforward.
Yeah.
I think it's just your average inventory divided by your cost of goods sold.
Yes.
Something along those lines.
Yes. Average
Yeah.
total cost of goods sold divided by, yes. Smaller one on bottom.
Right. It's been a few years since I was referred to as a hot 36, but I like the concept of what you're talking about. Our inventory has been a mess for a long time, and that's not from a lack of effort by any means. I mean, we've acquired companies, we've got good deals on products, we've had discontinued products, companies that have been around for 30, 50, 100 years, some of them in our industry. And the locksmith's favorite thing to do is, don't throw that out. We might need that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm.
And then the only time you actually throw it out is when you get sick of moving it around, because you move that same piece of hardware every 6 or 7 months for eternity. What we focused on, Chad's calling them the hot 36. I call them commodities. Those replaceable items, common for us, a deadbolt, a commercial grade deadbolt, a grade 2 lever set. These things that are really just completely swappable. Those are the things that we focus on. High turns. Those are the things that we're focused on. Price point makes a lot of sense for those because they're high turn. Economies of scale is one of the most misleading things in our industry, because people will load up and, if I buy 1,000 of these, I'll save 20%.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, but man, it's going to take you 25 years to sell 1,000 of them.
Right.
What's the cost of holding on to that inventory and the cash that you tie up?
Right. So it's not to say, things like your slag and your Weiser key blanks and your common things that you sell every single day. Those are things you should focus on for economies of scale and should try and get some extra margin dollars there. But the vast majority, I'd say like probably over 95% of the inventory you hold is not worth the extra 5 points to bring in a mass quantity.
I think people would be surprised if they calculate their inventory turns. I mean, if you take your total cost of goods sold and divide out the number of amount of inventory you have and say it's 4, that basically means you're keeping a product for 3 months on a shelf.
Yep.
What's the point of doing that, right? Like, even a month, that's a long time. Like, if you're just ordering grade 2 levers once a month, that's plenty.
So
and I think most people would be surprised if they looked at that. I think another thing that's really hard in our industry is, being a service-based company, you're also putting all that on every single truck. Inventory can really easily get out of hand, and inventory turns is a great way to monitor that.
how do you move from, because a lot of inventory, especially in the small business world, is intuition. It's this is what I feel that I need. How do you move from intuition-based inventory to strategy or calculated-based inventory?
You lost me there. Can you rephrase the question?
I will do my best, Tony. If you're in a small business, sub 10 employees, and you are making inventory decisions based off of intuition, I feel like we sell X number of these widgets. I feel like we need to keep this number on hand. How do you move from that? What's the first step that you do to move from that intuitive based inventory to a structured, calculated based inventory that you can point back to and say, this is what we need, this is what we don't need?
Find a way to track it. It's the first or second largest expense you're going to have. So do it in your software somehow, whether it's your accounting software, your dispatch software.
A
Put a
spreadsheet.
priority on
Mhm.
put a priority on tracking it, because it's a massive expense, and if you're not tracking it, you're for sure losing money on it.
Yeah, I think this ties into. I don't want to get into an accounting talk here, but understanding the difference between just accounting for inventory. There's still lots of companies out that are calling purchases. They'll have a line on their income statement that says purchases, and everything they buy is just expensed.
Supplies.
Right? Yeah, supplies. So that is a good way to kind of hide what's really happening, and then you look out there and you actually see, I've got a whole bunch of inventory on here that's not actually on my books because they were expensed as purchases. So the main thing would be start creating purchase orders. If you're not doing it already, start creating purchase orders. That'd be step one. Most of us probably are, but if you're not, purchase orders, and then keep track in your software what you have for inventory. Do an audit, do a count, and see what all has been in there. Something that I may have borrowed from one of you. I won't mention your name, but I was wandering around in one of your warehouses, and I saw that every piece of inventory not only has a SKU on it, but it also has a date on it. So when that hardware was put on the shelf. And that's just simply adding that when you print off the SKU, when you receive the hardware in the warehouse, and you put it on there. And that was like, to me, it was like, oh, baby. Because now, when I have a little producer or a warehouse and I notice that, cash flow is tight, it's generally because we have a bunch of inventory sitting on the ground somewhere. I go and look and find, oh man, these have been here for 3 months. These have been here for 6 weeks, all that kind of thing. So those
It's
are
great when you find
very,
one that's 5 years old. Like,
yeah,
why?
yeah. And some of them don't even have numbers on it. It's like, okay, this is over 13 years old. The hard part, and this is going to be controversial. I know Ken's head's going to explode if he hears this, but we talk about, you can write off inventory, which means two things. One, okay, we're going to write off inventory at low, you're going to expense a bunch of inventory, lower your taxable income, and that all works fine. But most people write it off, but they don't actually throw it out and actually write it off. And they're still, and I'm guilty of this too, because you look, oh man, this is $1,000 piece of hardware. I don't want to throw this out. This is worth something. But actually, what Chad started this with was talking about the cost of managing that, of moving it, of counting it, of keeping it, in the software, all of that. And you do that a few times a year. It probably costs you, I don't know, $25 to, that's a number straight out of the air, but it costs you a certain amount of dollars for every piece of inventory you have on there, regardless of how much it's worth.
Yeah.
So just biting the bullet, pull up a big old dumpster and fill it up.
Yeah, Sam went through this process. So he's our purchasing manager. Went through this process a couple of years ago. He took basically our what it cost us to house this facility, our lease rate, took the square footage of the actual warehouse and really kind of subset that cost down for just the warehouse space, and then broke it down into effectively how much does it cost us annually to sit one product on a piece of a shelf. So if we bought a piece of a product for $15 and it cost us $18 for it to sit there, then we literally went into mass negative for one piece of a product to sit there. That one piece, that product that we have to have, it literally cost us the $15 to buy it and $18. So when we go to sell it, are we actually going to recoup the cost that it took us to sit it on the shelf?
If you sell it. Yeah.
If we sell it, right?
Yeah.
And so they started to determine this, and they built this entire flow chart basically of cost segregation to have something sit on a shelf and then be able to move it through our system to effectively move it to dead stock at a faster rate versus trying to hold it on the shelf for a longer period of time. And that's the decisions that they make. And it really is impactful when you're in an industry where you have a lot of parts that you pay sometimes a smaller dollar value for because you have to have it. So just think, for instance, a strike plate in our industry, or a latch protector that you pay to hang there and you sell it for $40, right? But it cost you $60 to hold on to it for a year and a half. you are operating at a negative deficiency on a regular basis just to hold it in stock. So that's just a way to think about it, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think the golden takeaway here, Tony's mentioned it a couple times, is your inventory is your most expensive number 1 or 2 in your entire organization.
Yep.
And so we're talking about KPIs here. Main thing is look at that number and try to make it smaller.
Yep.
If the more you get into it, the more you'll realize it can be a challenge, but don't eat it like an elephant, right? You're trying to go bite at a time, figure out ways that you can look at specifics. And it probably took you 20 years to get to the mess you're in now. It's not going to happen overnight. So be diligent, be intentional about it, and go step at a time.
Marketing is the next measurable up. Who wants to tackle this one? Because I just took inventory.
Lars is up.
Nope.
Yes,
and we should try our best to be done about 45 minutes ago. So, yeah, I have an interview that Matt is just ad-libbing with, but that's minor detail. I'm sure she'll love that. Yeah, KPIs. We're talking about marketing KPIs. Is your ad spend paying off? I like that. When I read these topics, they sound like Chad speaking. This is paying off. Is your ad spend paying off for your marketing? Exploring how do you measure the return on the marketing investments?
How do you know if marketing is working?
Is your ad spend paying off in the marketing? What do you pay attention to? What are the KPIs?
Mm-hmm.
So,
this is where you answer that question.
But you did a fantastic job reading the notes.
Well, I was assuming that Beeves is going to want to edit some of this out, like every one of those.
These?
Yeah, every one of those. But I'm also trying to think a little bit because I think we got out of order.
Marketing. So one of the things we look at is cost of conversion. So we do a lot of online advertising. The biggest thing we're looking at is what does it cost us to get that lead into our house? And then going back to what we talked about earlier with average revenue per call, we can look at, is that cost of conversion better be less than our average ticket? Because if it's not, then it's not worth doing. So the biggest thing we're tracking is how much money are we spending? How many leads are they getting us? Is that cost of conversion appropriate enough? And is it paying off and worth doing?
Yeah, I don't want to tie this one back into your net promoter score, but our biggest focus in our budget and certainly in our marketing is referral business and spending time to make sure that the customers that we are servicing are happy with our service, and we're asking and we're teaching, and our people are learning to ask those questions like, hey, is there anything else we can do while we're here? Is there anything we haven't fulfilled that would prevent you from recommending us? And even just planting that seed, people say, oh no, it was great, because that's really what we're doing is we're just trying to focus on that referral business. And how do we actually pay attention to that, which is the KPI I'm going to bring up here, is we look at repeated business. So we look at, there's only, again, 2 types of business, because I try to keep things simple because I'm pretty simple. There's either new business or repeated business. So we just look at what is our new business as a percentage of our entire portfolio versus what is repeated business. And that gives us a pretty good idea of how well we're doing with our existing customers, because repeated business is generally good business.
Do either of you track referrals?
Man, we tried years ago to track referrals, and I think the data was just completely flawed, because that was relying upon somebody to ask where the lead came from, and they were just all came from somebody else, according to my data, which is why I think it was flawed.
Okay.
I think if you had some dedicated, if you could figure out a way, let me try to process this one. If you had the ability to tie that back to the customer services performance metrics, and then it would encourage them to try to gather that data as accurately as possible. And I don't think we've ever found a major value for our company in tracking it. So therefore it was one of those just kind of, I think, maybe a vanity metric that we weren't actually doing anything with. So therefore it didn't get the value to capture it. Marketing is a challenging thing to measure for me. So I'll just say I hate tracking the return for marketing because it's an activity that needs to be done to continue to promote the business. And I think that the proof is in the outcome year after year in growth, new customers, all those types of things. And it's hard for me. So I like really admire the fact that Tony calculates the how much it takes to get somebody in, and that is something that we've probably just never focused on because we know that it is required for us to do it. And so I'm not going to reduce marketing or increase marketing based off of that. It's just part of our natural muscles that we have to do to work out. And so I hate tracking it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Just
we
being
only
honest.
do it for the online advertising that we do. Like we know how much we're paying
Yep.
Google, so it's
Sure.
important to know how much is that lead costing us to get us, and then where's that lead going once we get us. If it's bringing us a bunch of leads that we don't convert on, then
Yep.
it's not worth it. So
I would also kind of just it really depends on your type of business. Are you business to consumer? Are you business to business? What is the type of target market, target audience that you're trying to go after? And then that probably is going to drive a big factor of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm glad this made it on the list because we all are sitting here talking about how hard it is to maintain and monitor. But I know the next one is conversion rate, and that's what we're going to discuss. And I think conversion rate is, well, that I think we're talking about how.
Basically, what a estimate a sales process. Did it take it? How do you measure if it was effective or not? Did you provide a quote and did it get accepted or
Gotcha.
turned down?
Yeah. So, when I talk about KPIs for our sales team, I'm just going to focus on that because that ties
Mhm.
into conversion rate, which I call win rate. I think that's the same thing. That's probably just translation of American to English. So the three things we look at with our sales team, one, we look at margin. So we have a margin target, meaning when we're calculating margin, we're just strictly talking about a simple version of margin, which is total sales minus the cost of the hardware. We don't look at the cost of labor generally, just because it's more difficult to track.
Mhm.
I use that as an allocated cost across the board. But so we look at margin target. We look at win rate, and that is simply if we send out 20 quotes and we won 10 of them, our
Mhm.
win rate is 50%. And then we pay attention to how many quotes we're sending out. Simple reason here is this is just very easy math for us. I'm not sure we've mentioned that here today, but the best performance indicator is the simple one. It's the ones that are easy to calculate, they're easy to remember, and they mean something. So I look at how many quotes we send out. If we send out more quotes, we will get more business.
Mhm.
That's all there is to it. Send out more quotes, and your win rate stays the same, you get more business. If you turn up your win rate, if you win more, okay, that's another way to get business. And then when I say get business, what I'm really talking about is driving revenue. So you can either increase that margin, you can increase how often you win, or you can increase how often you're quoting. Any of those things will impact the bottom line, but they're all very, very simple, very, very easy to keep track of, which is probably the best thing. And it gives our guys something to strive for, so they kind of understand where they're at
Mhm. Yeah.
relative to their goals.
I think that point is really important. I think with any KPI, people knowing if they're winning or losing, but also having a little bit of a mini competition with each other. I know when we started tracking our win rate with our electronic sales guys, I mean, we review it every week. What's your percentage for the last 90 days? And that they were passionate about that. They wanted to make sure that that number was increasing and they wanted to make sure they were doing better than their peers. So giving people visibility into how they're doing on little things like conversion rate, win rate, whatever you want to call it, it gives them something to strive for and helps them know if they're winning or losing. And it helps lead to more success.
Yeah, Chad, I'm going to jump back in here because I just looked at our actual scorecard. The one I forgot was the time on site versus quoted. So I think I
Mhm.
mentioned that earlier, but if it's easy to win a bunch of jobs, you just quote it for free.
Yeah.
That's a good way to win. But so we do add in that last metric and make sure that our time on site is roughly and should be about 1-to-1 for what we've quoted, because that keeps everything on the true and narrow, so straight and narrow.
Yeah, I think all of those matter. Same type of thing. We're monitoring the acceptance rate of a quote. We actually track the open rate of a quote. And then we also have a kind of a lag measure that looks back to see what we projected the cost for a estimate to be versus the actual, and try to make sure that we stay in line with that. And so there's a lot of measurables there. But from a conversion rate standpoint, managing that, it's really has changed down to the gross margin that our sales team is focused on obtaining on a weekly basis. So we don't, they have a yearly target and a monthly target and all that, but it's really what are they turning and getting approvals on week by week that is going to stack that deck in the future, because they're supporting multiple teams from an input standpoint. So if the pipeline slows down, then that is part of the reason why. So we track that down the line.
You just mentioned two things that I can't believe we haven't brought up yet. One, you just said open rate. Do you want to explain what you mean by open rate?
Absolutely. The open rate is our sales team works diligently to create an estimate and send it to a customer.
Mm-hmm.
And we got so frustrated years ago because we'd send out 70 quotes a week.
Mm-hmm.
We had no idea if the only ones we knew that got opened were the ones that got approved.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were sending out of that 70, if 20 of them just never even got to the right person, maybe the email was wrong, whatever, then that's literally 20 estimates that were completely wasted time and energy. And I would rather our team not do that. So we use a customer portal that sends a link out to a customer, and then they click on that link. And when they open that link back up, then it tells us if they actually received it or not. So they have a pie chart on their dashboard that says, here, of the 100 quotes that you sent, and it tracks it over a period of time, right, over 30 days. Of this quotes that you sent, here are the percentage that's been approved. Here are the percentage that has been opened and not approved. Here's the percentage that has never been seen, the unopened rate. And
do you remember what that number was? Because I do. You told me this about 4 years ago, and it knocked me off my chair. Do you remember what it was?
The unopened rate when we first started?
Yeah.
It was probably above 20%.
43. So of the 100 quotes you sent out, only 57 of them were even being opened by the customer.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
But nobody knew what it was previously.
Right.
So now we're tracking it. So looking at it right now, we're at 5.4% over the past 30 days. 5.4% has not been opened. So that represents 12 estimates. So we know those 12 phone calls that need to be made to make sure that the customer is getting the estimate.
That was the other thing that we haven't mentioned that we absolutely should. I don't know if it's just a lack of sales experience in our industry, because when I talk to others in other industries, where they talk about follow-up on quotes. Most locksmith companies, as Tony talked about earlier, your limiting factor is the amount of labor. So you've usually got more work than you can handle. So it's kind of it's certainly a luxury to have, but when you get into that growth mode and you can actually take on more business, it's amazing what following up with customers. We got one guy that's been a locksmith for 40 years, and he's a commission-based locksmith. And, he'll look at his schedule and be like, he's a little light today. And he'll grab paper copies of his quotes that he keeps in this little envelope, and he just picks them up and starts making phone calls. Hey, man, I'm checking in. Do you guys want this done, or what's going on? It's like, all right, cool. Yeah, I'll get that booked. I'll even come this afternoon. Like, he just literally just calling, because people get busy. Right? They get busy, and sorry, man, I forgot about it, or it doesn't make it to them. Open rate, right? So following up on those quotes is such a huge thing, and you can make that into a very simple KPI as well. Follow-ups. How many times have you followed up with each quote?
We changed that metric about 2 months ago and added that in. So each of our sales reps have what we call a cookbook. We stole that recipe from somebody else, but it's got like about 7 different measurables or activities that they're supposed to do every week. And one of those is follow-up. They got to select the number of follow-ups that they wanted to try to achieve, and then they worked towards that. And we went from having maybe 15 to 30 follow-ups in a given month to last month we had 300 follow-up activities measured in our system.
Have you seen the win rate go up?
The win rate goes up, and we'll see that projection month after month down the line.
Yeah.
So when you track those in your sales meeting, how do you report on that? Are they bringing those measurements into the meeting, or what does that process look like?
Yeah, so the everything that we track, one of the definitions, and this is way into the weeds, but one of the things that we're really focused on is it has to be automated. It
Hmm.
should not require. I don't want a salesperson to spend an extra 3 hours a week on reporting. I want them to spend 3 hours a week on the activities that need to be done. So follow up is tracked by a follow up note that goes in our
Okay.
system through a process. So that's email or phone call, and they put that in there. So then it also provides visibility to the rest of the sales team to know which ones have been done and which ones haven't.
Mhm.
And so it tracks that. Appointments, they track their appointments through our
Hmm.
software, so we know the number of appointments, approvals, all of the things that they're supposed to be, the activities they're supposed to be doing. It's all automatically tracked. So then when we have our sales meeting at the end of the week, it's all there in real time and ready to go.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and they were talking about in their scorecards they do a lot of self-reporting. So you come into the meeting and you say, "Here were my measurables." And one thing that I think that really helps with is accountability. It's a lot harder for me to come in and say, "I did 3 follow-ups this week," than it is to say, "Oh, Tony did 3 follow-ups. Lars did 4 follow-ups." So we're trying to implement that into some of our scorecards. And another thing I know, Chad, you have a lot of automated systems, and that's great, but a lot of people listening may not. Lars, you mentioned to me a couple years ago that literally you, for your accounts receivable, you had a piece of paper on the wall and you made people go and write up what this number was, and actually making people manually write it actually had more of an impact. So I think if you can automate it, that's great, but
Mhm.
there's also some advantages to not having it automated. And for people listening that don't have the ability to automate, do something. Make sure that you're tracking it some way, even if it's pen and paper sitting on a desk.
Mhm.
But tracking these KPIs and however you can, it's going to bring value to your business. And even if you can't have it automated, make sure you're tracking it somehow.
Yeah, and I stole that. Is it Dave DeLacy? Is that his name at
Yeah, yeah.
the Corbin factory?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I walked in there and I saw that factory. It's a building that's, I don't know, 10,000 years old, and they're bending metal to turn them into doorknobs. And I thought, I wasn't sure what to expect, and I went in there and it was so just one after another, like a military style. Like everything was, it was unbelievable. And then all this automation and all this automation, and we got little gadgets driving around and doing a bunch of cool stuff.
Mhm.
But then his reports, it was a big old piece of paper,
Hmm.
like one of those giant post-its sitting there on an easel. And as he would walk up to each department, the department head would go over there with a marker and write it on the wall.
Yep.
This is what their number was.
Yep.
Because he said that makes them own it. That makes it impactful.
Yep.
And I love that. So just giving him a little shout out there, because I absolutely ripped that off from him.
As we have done with most of the things in all of our businesses, we've learned from other people, we've seen it in action, and we've taken and applied a spin to it in our organization. Final thing on the list is training effectiveness. Who does that fall down to?
That's you, Chad.
Oh, training effectiveness. We're in the middle. As a transparency, we're in the middle of this right now. So we have a theory, we have concepts of a plan. We're trying to work on if we can actually implement it. But a technician scorecard, which is a mix of several different factors, including billable hourly rates, customer feedback, or the net promoter scores, the gross margin that they actually generate, the time on site versus time quoted, all of those factors, and as well as peer scorecards, and it all rolls into a technician score.
Mhm.
Mm.
The parts of those will also be a factor for our learning management system that we're implementing right now, which is modular based training. So they'll be able to put all of that together. Then that will give them a score on this scale of a level 1 to a level 5 technician, and then those levels will then correlate back to the types of jobs that work. Um, the big factor around it is, does the training actually apply to the improvement of their productivity?
Does it work? Yeah.
Correct. So what we're theoretically trying to do is, if a technician is weak in these particular areas, so we should be able to now navigate how long it takes this technician to do this task. Let's say a door closer, for instance, this technician to install this door closer versus technician B to install the door closer. He can do it faster, better, less warranty calls, less whatever. Then what is the training that needs to be required for this other person? And then at that point, we should be able to measure the effectiveness of that in the long term. So I still think we're probably 18 months to 24 months out from seeing the realization of it. And we've been working on it for the past 12 months of curating the information, watching the data points that we have to see if they match up. And now that we feel that we have a strategy for it, now we can implement it and share it with our team.
You said something there that's very simple to track, and that's number of warranty calls. I think that if you have a training program, those should be going down. There can obviously be other factors that contribute to that, but something as simple as just tracking how many warranty calls. If you want to get a little more complicated, how many warranty hours on site, because that's missed revenue opportunity. Another thing we like to track with training is how much time do we spend training. We want to make sure that we're being intentional about it. We always say we need to train, we need to train, we need to train. Well, we don't know if we're training unless you track it. So making sure that you're having, if you have another guy riding with another one, make sure they're somehow punched into a training thing and track that. We want to have X amount of training hours per week. I think the big thing with that is just making sure you're doing something to measure that you're actually doing what you say you want to do.
Yeah, this is perfect segue. I was just talking about the
That wasn't me.
Perfect segue. I was just talking about the big old piece of paper at the factory in Connecticut. We literally have a big laminated piece of paper with all the technicians' names on it, and we keep track of with a marker every morning. Our dispatcher will go over and just write on the wall how many hours each guy spent training that day.
I like it.
It was very simple, but it keeps me accountable to it. It keeps me at front of mind. If I walk by and see, oh man, we haven't got any training this week, right? The other thing is, I wanted our guys to see the investment that we are putting into them, right? Because I'm probably not the only one that hears like, oh, the training isn't good enough in this company. We don't get enough training. So this is an easy way to have a reference to say, you've got 60 hours in the last 2 weeks. You've got 60 hours of one-on-one time with a journeyman. Man, this is where I need some accountability from you. I need you to be better. I need, it also, it gives us an idea. It's a very, at the end of the week, we just total it up and put it on there. It gives us idea, not everyone's born to be a locksmith. It's just some people, this isn't a good fit for them. So, we will look at if we've given what I use just the 100-hour rule because it's an easy number again. And again, I'm quite simple. So the 100-hour, we spend 100 hours of training and we're not seeing that progression. That's when it's probably time to have that conversation of, this is where we're at. And I'm just not sure it's the perfect fit for you. So it's a pretty knuckle dragger barbaric kind of way of doing things, but it's effective enough until you have a software system that might be able to do this kind of thing automated. Don't let that stop you. Piece of paper on a wall works more than well enough to get started for sure.
Any of these KPIs that we've talked about today, you should be able to simplify it down to literally tracking it on a piece of paper to start with. When you see the effectiveness of it, see how you can implement it into any other automations that you have. The challenge with measuring most KPIs, people will say, well, I'm waiting on this to start measuring it. No, figure out a way to start measuring it today so that you can track the progression of it. And once you see it working, then you'll figure out ways that you can automate it and reduce the time invested on measuring. But the book states it very clearly. What's measured is managed. And if you find the ability to get those numbers out there, then you're going to see transformation in that area of your business. So, man, this was a really great conversation from a business owner's perspective, talking about the things that you would want to measure in your business and even some of the things that we've learned to measure better in our organization. So this is the type of content that you can expect from the Unlocked podcast every single episode. And we really appreciate you sticking with us through this. We're going to be learning how to improve our episodes. We're going to be working on improving the podcast, just like we're working to improve our businesses on a regular basis. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching today. And we look forward to sharing a great conversation in episode 2 with you, where we talk about, what are we talking about in episode 2? Does anybody remember?
Hiring? Team development.
Yeah. Hiring.
Talk about team development. That'll be a fun one.
That's going to be episode 2 coming up very soon. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the Unlocked Podcast.